The city slept under a veil of darkness, its streets empty and its buildings quiet, save for the faint hum of distant traffic. Detective Jameson stood alone at the scene, the only one still awake, still thinking. A woman had done this, he was sure of it. The murder was meticulously planned, each detail arranged with precision, and yet no one suspected the seemingly innocent woman at the center of it all. Jameson's sharp eyes scanned the area again, trying to piece together the riddle that no one had yet solved. The evidence pointed nowhere, the clues disappeared as if they'd never been there. But he couldn't shake the feeling. There was a pattern, a hidden trail. He turned and walked back to the squad car, determination rising. "I'll find her," he muttered to himself. The hunt had just begun. Jameson was no stranger to the world of crime, but something about this case felt different. He had dealt with countless murders, each one a twisted riddle of motives and means. But this one left him unsettled. It wasn't just the meticulous planning of the crime, it was the woman. The woman whose calm demeanor had fooled everyone around her. Her alibis were flawless, her behavior impeccable. Yet Jameson felt an instinct gnawing at him, something telling him that she was more than she appeared. As he studied the case files, he could almost hear her voice in his head, soft and controlled. He needed more. He needed to see her again. And this time, he would be prepared. The woman walked into the cafe with the confidence of someone who knew they were untouchable. She ordered her coffee with a soft smile, exchanging pleasantries with the barista, as if the world outside were of no concern. Jameson watched from the corner of the cafe, observing every little detail. Her posture, her movements, even the way she smiled, all of it was perfectly rehearsed. But Jameson had seen this before. He knew how to spot a liar, and this woman was a master. She was hiding something, and he was going to find out what it was. He stood, his chair scraping the floor, but she didn't turn. Not yet. Not until he was close enough. Jameson approached her slowly, keeping his footsteps quiet, his gaze locked on her as he neared the table. She looked up just as he reached her, her smile widening as if she were expecting him. "Detective Jameson," she said, her voice soft but unnervingly controlled. "I didn't expect to see you here." Her eyes held no fear, no surprise, only calm assurance. He sat down across from her, his mind racing. She knew something he didn't, that much was certain. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she added, her gaze shifting briefly to the empty seat next to her. "I was just thinking about how quickly people forget." Jameson leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "Forget what?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Jameson felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. This woman, so calm and collected, had somehow turned the tables. But Jameson wasn't one to be intimidated. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. "You know why I'm here." The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving his. It was almost as if she was savoring the moment, enjoying the control she held. Finally, she placed the cup down, her smile never fading. "You're a man who likes puzzles," she said softly, "and I'm just the one to give you a challenge." Her eyes glittered with a dangerous knowledge, and for the first time, Jameson realized the depth of her game. Detective Jameson was relentless in his pursuit, his instincts driving him to dig deeper into the woman's past. As he sifted through the case files, he began to uncover a disturbing pattern. Every time she was involved, the trail always went cold. No arrests, no conviction, just empty spaces in the police records. But there were whispers, hidden in the shadows of old investigations, that seemed to suggest something far darker. Her name appeared in connection with a string of disappearances, unsolved crimes that stretched across multiple states. Each of them was seemingly random, but had one thing in common: her presence, whether directly or indirectly. The more Jameson looked, the more he became convinced that this was no coincidence. She had learned how to manipulate every system to her advantage. He needed more. He needed to find the truth behind her flawless facades. The deeper Jameson dug, the more unsettling the discoveries became. The woman had been involved in several other unsolved cases, murders, disappearances, even a few instances of financial fraud. She had a history, but no one could ever link her directly to any crime. Jameson started pulling threads from old records, examining the patterns in her behavior. She would leave a trail just long enough to make people think they were close, but then vanish. The alibis were perfect, the timelines impeccable. Every step she took seemed calculated to perfection. And yet, as Jameson pieced together the evidence, he began to see a darker connection between all the cases. It wasn't just her involvement in them. It was the way she always manipulated people around her, turning allies into enemies, friends into foes. Her victims were always those who had trusted her the most. Jameson's obsession grew. He found himself returning to the cafe every day, watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake, to slip up, to reveal something that he could use to prove she was guilty. The woman, however, seemed to have become aware of his presence, her movements more careful, her eyes always glancing over her shoulder, as if she knew he was watching. He approached her once more, this time with a different tactic. He didn't ask questions. He didn't confront her. Instead, he waited. Jameson sat in the corner, eyes focused on her every move. She didn't flinch, but she couldn't hide the flicker of something in her gaze, a brief moment of recognition. He had her. She knew he was onto her. And that was the first real crack in her perfect armor. A week passed without any new leads, but Jameson wasn't ready to let it go. He was convinced that she was involved in something larger than he had initially thought. She was too careful, too calm, and that made him distrust her even more. He started tracking her, following her to a different part of town. She didn't notice him at first, but eventually, she realized she was being followed. The moment of recognition came when Jameson saw her glance over her shoulder, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. He quickly ducked into a side alley, trying to keep his distance. When he turned back, she was gone. The street was empty. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Jameson's heart raced. He had lost her. But he knew one thing for sure. She was playing a game, and he wasn't going to let her win. The next day, Jameson's investigation led him to a startling discovery. The woman was not acting alone. There was someone else in the background, someone who had been feeding her information, ensuring her plans were carried out without a hitch. The realization hit Jameson like a punch to the gut. He had been chasing a shadow, while the true threat had been lurking just beyond his reach. But who could it be? Someone inside the department? Another criminal mastermind working in the shadows? Jameson couldn't be sure, but the evidence was undeniable. He needed to find the accomplice, and soon before the woman disappeared again. With new urgency, he shifted his focus. This time, he wouldn't be fooled. The hunt had entered a new phase. Jameson sat in his office, staring at the wall of photographs and files that he had accumulated over the past weeks. The web of deception was becoming clearer, but the truth was still out of his reach. The woman, now known to have been involved in several high-profile crimes, seemed to be slipping through his fingers every time he thought he was closing in. He had followed her, tracked her, but each time, she evaded capture with eerie precision. He had studied her methods, her patterns, and still, she remained untouchable. But there was one thing Jameson knew for sure. She was about to make a mistake. People like her always did. It was just a matter of time before she would slip up, and when she did, Jameson would be ready. He leaned back in his chair, a grim determination settling over him. The hunt was on. It had been 2 days since Jameson had last seen the woman. She had disappeared from his radar again, just like she always did. But this time he had a lead. An anonymous tip. Someone had seen her near a quiet part of the city, a place that Jameson knew well. He immediately set out to investigate. The night was thick with fog, the streets quiet, and the shadows deepened as he drove through the empty roads. As he arrived at the location, he could feel the tension building. He was close. He could feel it. He stepped out of the car and made his way through the narrow streets, scanning every corner, every alley. There was no sign of her, but something in the air felt different. he wasn't alone. Someone was watching him. His senses heightened as he slowly crept through the fog, alert to every sound and movement around him. Jameson's heart pounded in his chest as he reached a dead-end alley. He was certain now she had been here. The air was thick with the remnants of something that didn't belong. He looked down at the ground, noticing faint footprints in the wet dirt leading into the alley. Without hesitation, he followed the trail. The alleyway twisted and turned, the fog growing thicker, but Jameson's resolve never wavered. Suddenly, the trail stopped at a rusted metal door, half hidden in the shadows. His pulse quickened. He didn't need to knock. He knew she was inside. With one last breath, Jameson pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and the air was heavy with tension. Then from the darkness, a voice spoke softly. "I've been expecting you, detective." The woman stepped out from the shadows, her presence almost otherworldly in the dim light. She wasn't afraid. She never was. Her eyes met his with a calm, unwavering gaze. "You've been looking for me for so long, detective," she said, her voice a smooth whisper. "But you still don't understand. This is bigger than you think." Jameson's hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't make a move. He knew better than to rush things. "What is it you want?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing tension. The woman smiled, the cold, calculating smile of someone who had everything under control. "I don't want anything from you, detective, but you've stepped into a game you don't know how to play, and now you're trapped." With those words, she disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Jameson standing alone, his heart racing. He had been played, and he knew that she had just taken the first step toward her victory. Jameson stood there for a moment, his mind racing. What had just happened? She had slipped away from him again, but this time something was different. He wasn't just chasing a criminal. He was caught in a game, and he wasn't sure if he was winning or losing. As he left the alley, his thoughts spun with questions. Who was she really? What was her end game? He had no answers, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't stop now. He had to keep pushing. The game had changed, and Jameson was determined to stay in it. He made his way back to the car, his mind focused on the next move. She thought she could outsmart him, but Jameson was ready to turn the tables. He had just found the first piece of her puzzle, and now he was going to solve it. Jameson could feel the weight of the investigation bearing down on him. He had been chasing shadows for too long, and yet the woman always seemed to stay one step ahead. But now, something had shifted. He had uncovered a clue. Something small. Something hidden in a place he had overlooked. It was a piece of paper, a cryptic note left at one of the crime scenes. It read, "The game is over when the pieces are in place." Jameson's mind raced. Was this a warning? A challenge? Or was it her final taunt? He stared at the note, the words seeming to mock him. His gut told him that this was the key. The woman was trying to lead him somewhere. She wanted him to find her, but for what purpose? He clenched his fists, knowing that this was his moment. He had to get to the heart of this, and fast. She was playing a dangerous game, and Jameson wasn't going to lose. Jameson followed the lead to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. As he approached the building, he could feel the tension in the pit of his stomach. This was it. He had followed every clue, every thread, and now he was standing at the door of what he hoped would be the end. The door creaked open with a low groan as Jameson stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The silence was deafening. He moved slowly, methodically, his every step cautious. The floorboards creaked beneath him, and he swore he heard something in the distance, a whisper perhaps. He paused, straining his ears. Was she here? Was this her trap? Or was this the final confrontation? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but there was no turning back now. He had come too far. The warehouse was colder than Jameson had expected. It seemed as though the very air was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. He moved deeper into the building, his senses heightened. There was no sign of the woman, no clue as to where she had gone. He called out softly, his voice echoing through the emptiness. "I know you're here." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, but there was no response. His flashlight illuminated a series of old photographs pinned to the wall. The images were grainy, distorted, but they showed a family, one that had vanished without a trace. He stepped closer, the photographs revealing more disturbing details. The woman was in these pictures. She had been connected to these disappearances all along, and she was still out there, somewhere in the dark. Jameson's pulse quickened. He had found another piece of the puzzle. But it was only a matter of time before the game reached its deadly climax. As Jameson turned to leave, he heard a faint click, the sound of a door locking. Panic surged in his chest as he realized what had just happened. The woman had him cornered. He spun around, drawing his weapon, but there was nothing, just the empty shadows. The silence seemed to suffocate him. Then, a voice. Cold. Calm. D. "You've been chasing me for so long, detective. Don't you see? This has always been my game." The voice came from the darkness, but Jameson couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. "You should have never come here," the woman continued. "You think you can stop me, but you're just another pawn in my plan." Jameson's heart raced. This was the moment he had been waiting for, but he couldn't see her, couldn't reach her. The tension in the air grew unbearable. He knew she was close. Too close. And there was nothing he could do. Suddenly, the lights flickered to life. The harsh fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead, casting a cold, sterile glow over the room. Jameson's heart skipped a beat as he saw her standing there across the room, her face calm and unreadable. "You're too late," she said softly, her voice carrying across the silence. "This was never about you, detective. This is about something much bigger. You've been a part of my plan from the beginning." Jameson took a step forward, his mind racing. What was she talking about? What had he missed? But before he could respond, she disappeared into the shadows once more, leaving him with nothing but the sound of his own breathing. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The days after the encounter in the warehouse were a blur for Detective Jameson. He had no answers, only more questions. The woman had taunted him, vanished into the shadows, and left him wondering what had just happened. But now, something had changed. Jameson was no longer chasing shadows. He knew the truth was within his reach. He had to find her before it was too late. The cryptic note, the hidden clues, the photographs, it was all starting to fit together like a twisted puzzle. The woman had been playing him, but now, he was the one controlling the game. His lead had brought him to an old mansion, abandoned for years, but still standing. It was the perfect place for the final confrontation. Jameson's heart pounded as he approached the mansion, the fog rolling in around him. This time, he wouldn't let her escape. He was ready for whatever was coming. The door creaked open as Jameson stepped into the mansion's foyer, the wood groaning under his weight. The dust in the air was thick, and the smell of decay was overpowering. He moved cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the dark corners of the room. Every step echoed loudly, as if the house itself was alive, watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. His hand gripped the handle of his weapon, but his instincts told him that violence wouldn't solve this. This was a psychological battle, one that he had to win with his mind, not his gun. As he moved deeper into the mansion, he felt the presence of something, or someone, lurking in the shadows. He wasn't alone. His eyes scanned the room, and in the distance he saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was her, the woman, and she was waiting for him. "You found me," the woman's voice rang out from the darkness, cold and controlled. "But it doesn't matter now, you're too late." Jameson froze, his heart racing. Her words echoed through the empty house, but she wasn't in sight. Where was she? "You think you can stop me?" the voice continued, now coming from behind him. He spun around, but she wasn't there. The room was empty. Panic started to rise in his chest. This was her game. She was always one step ahead, always in control. "You've been chasing me, detective, but you're not the one calling the shots," the voice taunted. Jameson's breath was steady, but his mind raced. He had to outsmart her. He had to get to her before she disappeared again. He pushed forward, ready to face whatever was waiting for him in the shadows. Jameson's mind was racing. The woman was everywhere, and nowhere all at once. He could hear her voice in every corner, every whisper of the mansion, but he couldn't see her. The tension was unbearable. Then, in the corner of his eye, he saw something. A fleeting movement. A shadow passing in the dark. He took a step forward, his instincts kicking in. The woman's taunts were fading, replaced by a strange silence. Was this her trap? Had he fallen into her hands once again? But no, this was different. This time, he was in control. The woman had underestimated him, thinking she could play him for a fool. He moved towards the source of the movement, determined to find her once and for all. He pushed through the dark hallway, the light from his flashlight catching on something, an old painting of the woman. The eyes in the painting followed him, a haunting reminder that she had been watching him all along. The final confrontation came without warning. Jameson turned a corner and found himself face to face with the woman. She was standing in the middle of a grand, decaying room, her figure framed by the broken windows. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass, but inside it was deathly quiet. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She was calm, too calm. "It's over," Jameson said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "This game ends now." The woman smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "It was never about the game, detective," she replied softly. "It was about the chase. And you've played it perfectly." With a sudden movement, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small device. The room filled with a low hum as the device activated. Jameson's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" he demanded. But she was already moving, already slipping into the shadows again. "Goodbye, detective," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing noise. And then she was gone. The mansion was silent. For a moment, Jameson stood still, heart pounding in his chest, trying to piece together what had just happened. The woman's device had activated, and the room seemed to vibrate with a strange energy. The air was thick with tension, and a sense of dread settled over him like a heavy cloak. He knew she wasn't gone, not for good. She had always been steps ahead, pulling the strings, controlling the game. But now, the power had shifted. He had been lured into her world, into her trap. He could feel the walls closing in around him. The device was still humming in the background, but the room had taken on a surreal quality, the air growing colder with every passing second. Jameson's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. Was this her final move? Or was it just another part of her game? One thing was clear. He had no choice but to keep moving forward, to find the woman and put an end to this madness once and for all. Jameson moved cautiously through the mansion, the faint hum of the device still reverberating in the air. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet seemed amplified in the quiet. He knew the woman was still somewhere inside, watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. The entire mansion felt like a labyrinth, each hallway stretching endlessly into darkness. The walls seemed to close in on him, the silence broken only by his own breath. His thoughts were consumed by the woman's cryptic words. "It was never about the game, detective. It was about the chase." What did she mean by that? Was this all just a distraction, a game she was playing with him? Jameson couldn't afford to waste time. He had to find her before the device activated fully. If he didn't, he would be trapped here in her world forever. Jameson's steps echoed in the emptiness as he finally made his way to the basement door. The hum of the device had grown louder, vibrating through the floorboards. He had no choice now. He had to face her. He opened the door, the rusty hinges protesting as he stepped down into the darkness. The air was cold, damp with the smell of mold and decay. The basement was a maze of old crates, broken furniture and long-forgotten memories. And then, in the center of the room, he saw it. The device. It was a small black box, surrounded by wires and buttons. But there was no time to examine it. Jameson's eyes shot to the far corner of the room, where the woman stood, her back turned to him. She had been waiting. She always had been. The woman turned slowly, her face illuminated by the dim light as she faced Jameson. Her smile was faint, almost smug. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice smooth and almost affectionate. "But you're too late, detective. The game has already ended." Jameson's mind raced. She was taunting him again, but this time he was ready. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. The woman stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete floor. "I want you to understand," she replied, her eyes locking with his. "This was never about the crimes, the games, or even you. It was about control. It's always been about control." Jameson's pulse quickened as the full weight of her words hit him. She had never cared about the crimes themselves, she had simply wanted power. She had been pulling the strings all along. Jameson's hand tightened around the grip of his weapon, but he didn't draw it. He had to outsmart her, not overpower her. "You're insane," he said, his voice rising with a mix of anger and disbelief. The woman laughed softly, the sound echoing in the empty basement. "Am I?" she asked, her tone mocking. "Or am I simply smarter than you? You've been chasing me for so long, detective, but you never understood the game." She reached down and pressed a button on the device. The low hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor. Jameson's heart skipped a beat. "What are you doing?" he demanded. The woman's smile widened. "I'm finishing the game, detective. But it's not you who gets to win." The room was suddenly filled with a blinding light, and Jameson's vision went white. The light faded, and for a brief moment, everything went still. Jameson's mind struggled to adjust, his thoughts clouded by the sudden blinding flash. But as his vision slowly returned, the world around him felt different. The basement had changed. The air was thick with tension, but there was no longer the hum of the device. Instead, there was an eerie silence. Jameson blinked, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The woman was gone. For a split second he questioned if it had all been a hallucination, a cruel trick of his mind, a last parting gift from the woman who had toyed with him for so long. But then, from the shadows, a familiar voice spoke softly. "You think you've won, detective." It was her. The woman's voice echoed around him, and Jameson's heart sank. The game wasn't over. She was still playing, and he had fallen right into her trap. The voice continued to mock him from the shadows, cold and unrelenting. "You never understood what you were really up against, did you, detective? This isn't just about the crimes, the chase, or the lies. It's about the control." Jameson's pulse quickened. She wasn't gone. She was manipulating him, pulling the strings from the darkness. He turned in every direction, searching for her, but there was no sign of her. "Where are you?" he shouted into the empty room. "Show yourself." But the woman didn't appear. Her voice came again, now closer, but still unseen. "I've been watching you, every step you've taken. You thought you were in control, but I've been the one leading this dance all along." The cold realization hit him. She was controlling the entire situation, making him question everything, even his own sanity. She was always one step ahead. Always. "Enough." Jameson's voice broke the silence as he took a step forward. His mind raced. He had been chasing her for so long, and he wasn't going to let her win now. "I know you're here," he said, his voice steady. "You can't keep hiding forever. I'm not afraid of you anymore." The room seemed to shift, the walls narrowing as though the mansion itself were closing in around him. But Jameson was resolute. He wouldn't back down. He couldn't. The woman's laughter echoed, faint but unmistakable. "You think you've figured it out? That you're in control? But you've always been my pawn, detective. This is where the game ends. For you." Jameson gritted his teeth and reached for his weapon. The final showdown was inevitable, and he was ready. He could feel the woman's presence, her eyes on him, even if she wasn't physically there. The trap was closing, but this time he was prepared to fight for his freedom. The silence that followed was deafening. Jameson's breathing was the only sound in the cold, empty room. Then, without warning, the floor beneath him began to shake. The lights flickered again, and the basement filled with the sound of creaking wood. The woman's voice came again, louder this time, closer. "You're too late, detective," she taunted, her voice seeping from the cracks in the walls. "I've already won." Jameson's eyes narrowed. This was it. This was her last move, and he was going to beat her at her own game. He took a deep breath and steadied his grip on his weapon. "We'll see about that," he muttered under his breath. With a sudden burst of energy, Jameson moved toward the shadows where he knew she was hiding. It was time to end this, one way or another. In the final confrontation, Jameson reached the center of the basement. The device hummed one last time, and for a moment, everything stood still. The woman appeared before him, standing in the center of the room, her eyes cold and triumphant. "You've played well, detective," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "But this is where the game ends." With a flick of her wrist, she triggered the device, but this time, Jameson was ready. He lunged forward, knocking the device from her hands and sending it crashing to the ground. In that instant, everything changed. The tension in the room evaporated, and the woman's control shattered. Her calm demeanor faltered for the first time, and Jameson saw it, the fear in her eyes. She had underestimated him. He had finally outsmarted her. With a swift motion, Jameson apprehended her, bringing her to the ground. The game was over. For both of them.